The Daily Code Snippet. Let's now look at service-based font face. In this case, you are using a service, whether free or paid, to deliver the font files to your user. The most well-known service-based font face is Google Fonts, primarily because Google provides its fonts for free. Another service that a designer may be familiar with is Adobe Typekit. As long as you have an active subscription for Adobe Creative Cloud, you have access to all the fonts for desktop and web that are included with Adobe Typekit. It is also possible to purchase subscriptions with various type foundries to get access to their service-based fonts. An example of a foundry that offers a service like this is Heffler & Company. The advantage of using a service-based font face is that you don't need to worry about converting your font files to all the different type file formats using an @font face generator like Font Squirrel. The service takes care of providing all the appropriate files so that as long as you pay for the service, your fonts will be delivered to the user so that the font displays as it should no matter what browser they are on. It is similar to using a video service like Vimeo or YouTube to deliver video content instead of using HTML5 video, where you have to provide all the video file formats for the video to be compatible cross-browser. With a service-based font face, you just need to know what code to embed in your files to deliver the fonts. You should still use the font stack because if something happens with the service's server, that may be a reason the fonts are not delivered. This way, an appropriate font will be chosen to which the user has access. Some episodes ago, we went over how to add a Google font to your web page. It was in the context of the demo page we created. We will review it here so you can see how to install Google fonts into your web pages, rather than having it pick whatever font it finds. So if we go to Google Fonts, you have all sorts of different fonts that you can choose, and you can choose whichever font you like. So when you open Sans in your Google font window, it'll give you all the options that are available. So you have light, regular, semi-bold, bold, extra bold, and italic, and you can look at the glyphs palette. It'll tell you a little bit about the designer and the licensing. So one of the main reasons that people use Google Fonts, of course, is because you don't have to pay licensing fees with Google Fonts, and that's why they've become particularly popular. As a Adobe user, you also probably have access to Adobe Typekit, and so the process would be similar for any web-based font foundry, that you would go to the page and you need to get the embed code. And so for Google Fonts, the way you do it is you select which styles you want to embed. And so I'm just going to pick the light italic, the regular italic, and the bold italic. And if we know that we're not going to use a particular weight, then we shouldn't include it. I'm kind of keeping it open by selecting all of these. And why is that important? Well, because the more fonts you select from the family, the more that your page is loading, and it slows it down. So you really only want to choose the fonts that you know that you're going to use when coding your web page. So what you have here is there's two different options for bringing in the font into your web page. There's the link option, and there's the @import option. And what I'm going to do is use the link option. And there's also the option of downloading if you are using your the Google font into something like your InDesign or other type of desktop version. So the other thing you want to make note of is it says here, CSS rules to specify families. And the reason this is important is because you want to know how you're going to write this out for it to choose the font that you're loading in. So Open Sans is a font that has actually 2 words. And so whenever you're using a font that has 2 words, it needs to be in these single quotes on each side. And you need to put that space in between. And this is actually a font stack, meaning if it can't find Open Sans for whatever reason, so perhaps Google servers are down or there's an issue with the internet and it can't load the font, and in that case it's going to choose a sans serif font preferentially over a serif font when it's trying to find a font to use, since it cannot load Open Sans for whatever reason. So we've copied our code, and we need to go to our code page. And what we're going to do is we're going to add it. So anything like loading fonts, loading style sheets, that all goes in our head. So we have our opening tag for our head here, and we have our closing tag for our head here. And we're going to put this above the styles. We want it to load the font in before it's trying to do the styles, because we're going to start entering the use of the font in our styles in the style section, so it needs to have already loaded the font. So we want to put it beforehand. And what I'm going to do is create a typography section in our styles. So this code is basically telling the browser to connect to Google, to connect to the Google API, to get these fonts, the Open Sans and the weights that we chose. So the light italic, the regular italic, and the bold italic. And so if we want to start including this in our page and we want it to be used globally, we can say the body, and it will, anything that's a child of the body is going to pick up this command. So we want to tell it the font family, and we want to use those single quotes and put the words Open Sans, as we saw on the page. And then our stack, that if it can't find Open Sans, it's going to pick any sans serif it finds. So if we save and refresh, we now see that it's pulling in a sans serif, and it's pulling it in globally. So it's affected all of the typography on the entire page. And it's still using the hierarchy that comes kind of preset, because we're using H1, H2, H3, H4, and paragraph tags and list tags. But now that you've entered a font, you can actually control the size of things by adding into our style sheet. So if we wanted to affect the size of, let's say, the H1, we would tell it, font size, and then we could pick a number. We can see how this looks. And then for leading, the equivalent of leading on the web is essentially the line height. And a standard reading would be 1.3 to 1.5 ems. We're going to save that and take a look. So you can see it got a little smaller, and it's kind of close to here. We can either push it down by increasing the line height. We can also see if we can add some spacing above our navigation. So if we look here, we've told it to have no padding around. But what we want to do maybe is add a little bit of padding to the top and the bottom. And so if you are using the padding or margin, typically you add 4 numbers, and that represents the top, right, bottom, and left. But when if you're okay with the top and the bottom being the same number and the left and right being the same number, then you can just use the 2 numbers. And again, so here 20 pixels represents the top and the bottom, and 0 represents the left and the right. So now if we save that and we refresh, then you can see that it's a little bit pushed down. And I think what I'll do actually is add the line height to the body. So we have our 6 levels of headings, and we're just going to make it kind of cascade down. Presented by Designers Learn Code.